Hello and welcome to Level 4 Health and Social Care, Unit 404, Reflective Practice. And we're looking at week 2 of our unit and we're focusing on supervision in this week. The objective from your assignment that we're really addressing is 2.3, explain the role of clinical supervision in health and social care. So we're going to talk about really what supervision is, a little bit about how it works, particularly in the health and social care field, and what the sort of processes are. So first of all, let's have a look at some definitions of supervision. I've got you 3 different definitions here. You can see which one you think suits you the most. Supervision is a practice-focused professional relationship that enables reflection on practice with a skilled supervisor. Through reflection, you can further develop your skills, knowledge, and enhance your understanding of your own practice. And that one's from the Nursing Midwifery Council, so you can see it's very much focused on generally the health and social care environment. Another one from some psychology researchers is supervision is an intensely interpersonal focus, one-to-one relationship in which one person is designated to facilitate the development of therapeutic competence in another. And finally, your third one, from some other researchers as well, Alsop and Ryan, is supervision is a communication process between a supervisor and their student. So this is in the educational setting. The process enables the student to explore and increase knowledge and understanding of professional practice and develop OT skills and knowledge. These were people who are working in the with occupational therapy students, hence the OT skills and knowledge. The one thing that all the definitions have in common is it's about development, it's about improving practice or improving knowledge and improving your understanding of how to do things, and feeding back on that process. Okay, so there's reflection involved in that. Okay, so that's the one thing they all have in common. The first one is a clinical practitioner. The second one is a psychological practitioner. And the third one is a student, in this case, an occupational therapy student. So they all work in the same way, even though they're looking at people in different spheres. So the main elements of supervision, what's it all about? It's the opportunity to reflect on and explore your current professional practice. So, find out about how well you're doing things, getting some feedback. It's also the opportunity to have some space to talk about things where you're feeling things didn't go so well, and to offload some of your negative feelings. And you can discuss problems outside the management structure. So it's not about sort of just talking about what the management wants you to talk about. You can be talking about something wider than that. You can be talking about the dynamics of the team, where maybe some people not getting on has caused a problem for you, or where you clashing with someone has caused a problem. It's supposed to be a safe space for you to do that. It's the opportunity for professional support and feedback. It's usually done by somebody more senior to you or more experienced than you for this very reason. But it's for you to evaluate your own practice as well. And sometimes when we're working and we're busy, we don't get the chance to sort of sit back and really reflect on, did I do that well or did I do it and not so well? And it's something you can do as part of your session with your supervisor, where you can honestly take some time to say, I would have liked to have done it this way, and then maybe that's what I should do in future. So it's about professional development, and it's a personal development thing as well, because they might also teach you some coping skills that you didn't have beforehand. Clinical supervision very much focuses on the clinical role, Um, so it's really about clinicians meeting and talking to reflect on practice with the intention of learning and developing. So again, as I said, it's usually someone who's more skilled than you so that you can learn and enhance your skills. And then this allows you to also discuss individual cases in depth. So if you've got some worries or concerns or some issues with creating a care plan for someone that you're really struggling with, then you can save that and take that to your supervision session and say, I'm really not doing this the way I want it. How can I meet these needs really? And you can change or modify your practice as a result of some of the things you've discussed in supervision. But it's also this supervision formally gives you some space to identify where there are training needs that you might have, or where there is some continuing development that you might need. So if someone's particularly, say, interested in working with people who need CBT or, cognitive behavioral work, say for instance, um, your supervisor might sort of put you forward for doing a course, as to expand your knowledge and things like that. And it's really these supervision sessions that lead to your personal development plan, which we'll be looking at in other units. So they feed into it. What it isn't, it's not just a management session. It's not just going through the diary and saying what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. It's not a training session where you actually, go in a separate environment and learn about a subject. In that sense, it is a learning experience, but it's not that sort of formal training experience. It's very much more of a two-way process, and it's very much more personal. Although you can pick up some education, obviously you can learn things during that session as well. And it's also different from just the practice of discussing urgent clinical cases with your peers. And that's the sort of thing you do in a team meeting. It's like, oh well, we've got this issue with Mrs. Jones, and when you discuss it as a team before you start the day, it's not that sort of thing. It's where you want to talk in depth about how do you manage things, and how can you improve your skills in working in certain areas. So there are two types of supervision, and it really depends on what the organisation's policy is, which one that you might experience when you're working in a care home or in home care. There's either individual supervision or group supervision. So individual advantage, the individual is usually done on a one-to-one basis. With someone who's more senior to you. It could be a supervisor, it could be your home manager, it could be a team leader, or it could be someone, a slightly more senior care worker who's had sort of special training in supervision. And some of the advantages of doing it individually is obviously confidentiality is tighter because it's just information that's passed between two of you. So people can feel safer to speak because they're only speaking with one other person. They're not having to worry about what other people's views, might be in a group. Because a time is set aside for you, and that's all of your time, then you actually have more time to talk about your issues. When you're in a group, you might have an hour for the whole group, so you will have to share that time with other people who've got an issue to raise as well. And because it is one-to-one, it's that bit more intensive. And relationships are more likely to grow and develop. They tend to be stronger, or they develop quicker because it's just you. So it's, as I said, it's more intensive. And hopefully trust will develop quicker as well. And, people will be more comfortable. The disadvantages of individual supervision, well, for the team management, it's actually quite expensive. It takes up a lot of time and resources, especially if there's a very large team who need to be supervised. So the manager might have to train, all the seniors or certain people. just to cover so that everyone has a sort of fair caseload, really. There's less likelihood of blind spots being discovered because there's only two of you, and if the person wasn't there, they're having to trust the way you recount an incident, really. Whereas if you're in a group supervision, your colleagues are more likely to call you out when you're not quite saying it like it is. There can be a danger of the supervisor over focusing on their needs. So if they are your team manager or your team leader, they may want to focus on things they've got in their agenda that they need you to do. And sometimes in a one-to-one, it's hard for the supervisee to say, actually, I've got this issue I want to talk about. It's a possibility of becoming too cozy and formal, where it becomes quite hard for the supervisor to, again, maybe criticize, or, even if it is constructive criticism, if they start to become too friendly, it can become a difficulty when they have to sort of, tell them when they're not doing something very well. It's quite a lot of pressure on the supervisor when you're doing it one-to-one as well, because they know there's a sort of transference of responsibility. People rely on them, and it can be quite a workload, especially if they're giving supervision to 5 or 6 people. It's having to find the time. It's quite difficult for them to talk about all these issues, even in their own supervision. So turning that around, the advantages of group supervision is if you've got a very big staff team, it's a very much more economic use of time and resources. That say a team leader can have a group of about 5 or 6 people together within an hour. It can be helpful for your peers to see that it's not just you who might have this problem. Somebody over there might be struggling with that as well, and that can be really, really helpful. Group members can learn from each other as well, so other people can put in their views, and that can actually lift a load a little bit off the supervisor, so you're having some sort of peer support as well. With a group, there's a wider range of personal and professional experience, so people again can get together and talk about different ways of doing things rather than it all, inspiration having to come from the supervisor. It could be a good place to try out techniques and role plays because you've got a group, so you can have a go at things and then do some feedback. It's often considered better for more experienced staff who maybe don't feel that they need this sort of one-to-one attention, but just want to sort of share some ideas or get some ideas from people, really, but don't need a huge intensive piece of development. Maybe they're already working very well. Some of the disadvantages is that obviously less time for an individual. So if you are having some difficulties and you do want to talk about it, you're only getting, everybody wants to say something, so you're not going to get that much time. In a group situation, they may not be able to reflect as deeply as you would do on a one-to-one for fear of embarrassment or, being uncomfortable. So you can't really go into maybe a very deep conversation is about, how did you really feel about that? 'Cause it's people might feel awkward. It can be intimidating, so you can get a group supervision where somebody never speaks up, especially if maybe other members of the group are a bit more experienced and confident than they are. They are going to find it quite hard to speak up. Who's going to put a lot of onus on the supervisor to try to get them to be part of it, but then it can be quite difficult. And the group can become preoccupied with its own dynamics rather than the actual process. So they can get tied up with the he said, she said, and why are you saying that? And the actual developmental part of it can get a bit lost. Confidentiality is a little bit more at risk because there's a group of people. So instead of just one person keeping someone's personal information safe, you're going to rely on 6 people to keep someone's personal information or someone's personal revelations safe. And, more people there are that know things, the harder it is to keep confidentiality. You would generally sort of try to manage that by everyone signing a group contract about how to behave and how to keep confidentiality. But that doesn't mean to say it always works. But that's the idea. So, as I said, we would normally have a supervision contract, be it group or individual, that covers really the whole setup. And it would have all the basic ground rules, all the practicalities, how much notice, how much time it's going to be, when, what to do if you need to cancel, those sorts of things, what space you're doing in, where it takes place, what sort of things you're thinking of. So boundaries as well, what we're going to say, what we won't say, what we will share, what we won't share, when and why and how. Accountability, who the supervisor has to take information to and why and when. You can also put what your expectations are, what are you hoping to get out of your supervision sessions, and that will work both ways. You can have expectations for the supervisee, what you're hoping for, and the supervisor will have expectations of what they're hoping for from you, and both of you will talk about expectations of how the other should behave, and that you will both be on time. You will make sure that your hour is put aside, and you won't be getting up and leaving during it. You'll speak to people, you'll speak to each other in a certain way. You won't be rude, you'll be polite, we won't get angry, those sorts of things. We talk about the format of it, the contract will, it will be 1 hour sat, together, and you'll document, you'll make notes at the end. And you might have a format for your action plans, what sort of things will come out of it. And you might have an agreement for when your plans will be reviewed. Will they be reviewed? Very often they're reviewed at the next session, but you can have some long-term plans. And somewhere in the contract will be mentioned that notes will be taken, and you might want to talk about the format of that as well. I've put a contract template in extra reading for you. Most organizations design their own. There are ones you can just pick up online as well. I just put one in so you can just see the sort of thing that you might be having to sign. Other things that need to be considered is if you are going to undertake a supervision process, it needs to be regular, not erratic, because that doesn't really help with action planning, and it really doesn't help the supervisee, if they don't know when some of these things are going to get reviewed or discussed. It needs to be quiet with no interruptions. You need to be very clear to the people outside, and this is more for the supervisor. They need to make sure that, say, I'm off doing supervision in this room, so please don't come in. I'm going to have the phone transferred out and things like that. It needs to be my mutual agreement. Nobody should be forced into it. But on the other hand, some organisations would be unhappy if you refuse to do supervision, and you'd really need to explore why. And if it's to do with people not getting on and that, then they need to sort of find another supervisor. But it could be a breach of contract if you join the organisation and supervision was something they did regularly and you refuse to have it. It needs to be a two-way discussion. It's not about your supervisor just giving you a whole lecture on things that they want done. Okay. And it needs to have a structure. You normally have an agenda, and you might have a little space where you just review any of the plans from last time, or any of the points that were raised, so that you can make a note on progress, and then any new issues to be raised. I've written here it needs to be formal and informal, because the formal part is documented, but sometimes there can be time for people just to sort of express themselves a little bit as well. And informal supervision will happen on a day-to-day basis. So when you've got a relationship with that supervisor, they can be supervising you informally, just, not in a session, but just around, a little word here, a little sort of support idea there. So you can look to your supervisor for informal supervision as well, asking them questions, asking their opinion of things. So it doesn't all have to be saved to that session. So guidelines for the person who's doing the supervising is that they do need to have attended some sort of training. It is often recommended they update their training in case there is any new developments in supervisor training at least every 3 years. Um, they do need to be supportive. They do need to facilitate the supervisee to identify issues, and they need to manage the situation. Most importantly, they need to pick out from what the supervisor is saying where there are personal and professional development needs and make sure they're clearly documented so that people can actually do some work or you can organise appropriate training. Their responsibility is to ensure that there is a contract in place and that both of you are clear about your roles and responsibilities. And usually you get the supervisee to sign a contract to say, yes, they're happy, they understand everything. You need to ensure that they share information. You need to be, as a supervisor, you will have a responsibility to raise any issues or concerns, no matter whether they're minor or serious. That's your responsibility. If the person doesn't raise it, then you must, because the whole idea is about managing people's competence and helping them to personally develop. So you have to raise things, even if it's uncomfortable for them. You just need to sort of be careful about your language. Supporting the supervisee to access safeguarding supervision where this is appropriate. So sometimes if you're dealing with a very serious safeguarding issue, you may take that outside of your normal supervision, and you may have some specialists, and it can often be a group, all the people working with a certain service user may have a particular supervision support set about safeguarding issues, or it might be done. There's a safeguarding in a larger organization. There'll be a safeguarding team which can provide supervision around safeguarding in particular. It's your responsibility if a person doesn't attend supervision to deal with it. You may be their line manager, you may not be their line manager. If you are not their line manager, it's your responsibility to speak to their line manager and not just ignore the fact that they haven't come, but do something about it. And it's your responsibility as a supervisor, it's your responsibility to keep written records of the sessions and make sure that the person gets copies of them as well. Supervisee's responsibility is to agree the dates and times of their supervision, and if you have a problem, to raise it beforehand, not at the last minute if you can, unless something really unusual comes and it all becomes all hands on deck and then things get cancelled. But if they say we're going to meet every Tuesday at 10, then agree that. Don't do it when you know that that's the time you've agreed to take service user out every week. It's your responsibility as a supervisee to prepare yourself for your supervision sessions. Think of your own agenda, put an agenda together, and have a look at your action plans or points of development, and think about some things that you might want to say about them. Have you managed to move on in that area? Are you still struggling in that area? Is there something that you couldn't do? So go with some thoughts in your head. Don't just leave it to the supervisor to to sort of control everything that gets discussed. It's also your responsibility to take responsibility for outcomes and actions. So when you agree to do something, when a supervisor says that we need to do this, then you need to go and do it. Or any outcome, I want you to attend this training. I want you to sign up to that. I want you to read this policy. Then if you've agreed to do something, it's your responsibility to do it. And they won't be chasing you for it. They'll expect you to come back to the next supervision to say that you've either done it, or if not, why not? It's your responsibility to keep your own written record as well, although they have to give you, they formally will take a record and then give you a copy. But if you want to keep your own notes as you remember them, then do so. But when you do get handed the copies, it's your responsibility to keep hold of them and look after them so that you can review them in your own time. And it's also, if you come up with an outcome about something that you're going to do for a service user, or something that needs to happen for a service user, it might come out of your discussions. It would be your responsibility as a supervisee to update their clinical records to say this is, this is going to happen, or this decision was made for Jean. So during the session, it will be mostly discussion. The supervisee will talk about their own work. They'll talk about the things on their agenda. They'll may reflect on some issues. They may talk about some theory that doesn't seem to be working in practice. The supervisor will give some feedback, and they will identify strengths and where there may be weaknesses. So hopefully they'll be giving you some positive feedback as well as constructive criticism. And out of that conversation, you'll both together, you should identify problems and then spend some time on what the solutions are. It's important not to get sidetracked and just end up focusing on just one area and then find out you haven't got enough time to address some of the other areas that the person thinks is important. So you both have a responsibility to keep on target in that respect. It's also important to end positively, even if it might have been a difficult supervision, even if the supervisor has identified areas, quite a few areas where you need to improve or need to change or need to develop. You can still end up with some positive things like a good action plan or a definite date by which some training is going to be got for you, these sorts of things. And it's important to end up on time. It becomes very disheartening for a supervisee if supervision drags on. They usually have about an hour, or some have 45 minutes. It really depends on the organisation, but they shouldn't really go on much longer than that because it's quite draining as well. Some of the barriers to supervision, some of the problems that might arise, it could be personality clashes between the supervisee and supervisor. And, it might be something that starts off, but you overcome. But if it's something that can't be overcome, then the supervisee would need to go to the line manager and say, this isn't working. Supervisee standard of work is not up to scratch, which means that it becomes quite a negative situation, and neither of you look forward to it. That could be a barrier to doing it well, really, when you've got someone who works in quite a poor way. Not somebody who works okay but has weaknesses, but someone who's just constantly not good enough. If it's someone who's developed a good friendship, that can actually be a bit of a challenge, because again, when you're having to give people some negative feedback, that doesn't always go down very well when there's a good friendship. And I find this is often the most difficult when you've got someone who worked at the same level as someone, and then maybe they've been promoted to a new job, like to a team leader role or a supervisor role, and they've worked for 8 years on the same level as someone that they're now supervising. That can be quite challenging, but it does happen. It does happen in care homes particularly. One of the barriers is when neither of you want to, either one of you doesn't really want to be there. That's very hard work for whoever the other one is. Um, Lack of insight with the supervisee, that we even when the supervisor is trying to guide them and identify, say, well, why, getting them to reflect, and that they have absolutely no insight, they're not able to reflect at all. And I've worked with people like that, and it is really, really difficult. They just have no insight into their job role at all. And eventually, you sort of try to counsel them into maybe finding a job that's more suitable for them, because they cannot see what the issues are. Barriers to supervision can also be someone's style and structure. If the structure the supervisor sets up is uncomfortable to the supervisee, or the other way around, generally it's the supervisor. And you should try and be able to challenge that a little bit and just say, look, I really find this bit uncomfortable. Could we try and do it that way? Confidentiality, we know that's an important issue. We know in a one-to-one situation, people might be offloading some very difficult things. So confidentiality is absolutely vital. But don't forget the normal rules. The supervisor will keep everything confidential unless if they reveal something that's unsafe or negligent practice, then the supervisor will have to take that information somewhere and do something with it. So if they're doing something that's maybe creating a safeguarding issue, or their practice is inappropriate, and if they're not willing to go and see someone themselves, because often they're not, because they don't know they're doing something wrong, and you've identified with them that that's an unacceptable way of behaving, but they say, well, I'm not going to do anything about it, then the supervisor will have to go to the next level up and get management involved. If the supervisee reveals some form of illegal activity, fraudulent activity, well, anything really, anything illegal that could affect the job or affect the organisation, then the supervisor has to go and speak to the next level in the management structure. If the supervisee is underachieving, and despite some performance plans and some good objectives, if they're not actually changing those, there's a certain time you can give people to improve. But if they're not improving, then the supervisor will need to go to a senior, because there may be some formal human resources processes that will have to be put into place, like written warnings, verbal warnings, written warnings, those sorts of things. So they would need to go out of the one-to-one structure and go elsewhere. What is feedback? A couple of definitions here. Form and non-judgmental communication, may be formal or informal, quite a wide one, or comments and information about the quality or success of something. So it's really, there is some sort of view involved. Why do we give feedback? Do we give it to correct someone, to punish them, to get something off our chests, or to show how good and clever we are? I don't think so, really. I think we give feedback, especially in the health and social care field, to instruct someone who may be new or maybe junior, who's learning, to help them enhance their strengths. So you can give positive feedback, say you're really good at that. So that gives them a feel-good factor as well. Or to overcome weaknesses, to help them change and improve and be a better member of the team, and to help them achieve their goals. That's why we give feedback. We don't give feedback because we enjoy it. We don't give feedback because we enjoy showing people where they're weak. We don't give feedback because we're annoyed with somebody. We may be annoyed with someone, but that's not really the motivation to give feedback. So if we are annoyed with someone, we need to take some time out and a breather, so that we don't show that we're annoyed with someone, and that we give feedback constructively. As well as the supervisor giving feedback, it's really, really important for yourselves to receive feedback well as well. So if the feedback that's been given to you isn't clear, if you're not 100% sure what people are saying, you must ask for clarification. They're not mind readers. If they feel that they've given you some feedback and then you don't act on it, and then you come a couple of weeks later and say, well, why didn't you do this? So I didn't know that's what you wanted me to do. Always ask for clarification. Be proactive. Listen without judging as well. Don't immediately jump to your defense because it's not meant to be a critical operation, really. And don't keep trying to explain away your actions. I know it's sort of human nature to do that, but really you should try and listen and then have the conversation about it. You could say, instead of being defensive, you could say, well, I thought that was the okay way to do it. Could you tell me why it isn't? Something. Try to be more constructive in your language rather than, yeah, I did it right. Um, and also, if the person isn't giving you feedback, they're just sort of talking about a next bit of development, but they're not really giving you feedback on, how well you did that when you thought you might have done something okay. Then ask for it. Say, okay, well, just to be clear, can you give me some feedback on when I did it on Saturday morning? Did I do it okay that time? So try to remember it's in your hands as a supervisee. It's not totally in the hands of the supervisor. You have responsibility to ask for things too. Little bit of extra reading for you. Have a look at the supervision forms in extra reading, just so you get an idea of the sort of documentation that we might use in care homes or in healthcare. All organisations should have a supervision policy. So those of you who are on placement in a care home or in home care, have a look, ask to see the supervision policy. Have a look at the one where you're working. And I've done a little video. I've got a little video link for you. So watch the video about supervision just to sort of enhance what you're looking at. And over the next 2 slides, I've just added a whole set of references which you could use when you're writing up your part of the assignment if you wish. Some of them you'll see the actual reference in my slides, but there's a lot of reading there if you want some wider reading to sort of pull out. Okay, so that's all there is on what is supervision. So have a look at that, do the extra reading, watch the little video, and then I'll see you for week 3. Okay. Bye bye. Thank you.